Hello, it's Mrs. Williams here, and I'm so excited to talk to you today about what I've been learning about neuroscience and how we can use brain theory to impact our teaching for effective teaching. So let's jump right into it. Teachers teach for one reason. They want students to learn. And because of that, we are so interested in brain theory and what the most efficient ways for our students to learn are. Okay, I think that every teacher, if we could know for sure that this strategy is going to help our students learn better, we would want to be using it. And so that's kind of what this whole little presentation is going to be about, is some things that maybe we've misunderstood and some things that we should be doing in our classroom. So one study that I'm going to keep referencing was an article that is called Improving Students' Learning with Effective Learning Techniques, Promising Directions from Cognitive and Educational Psychology, and that is from Dunlosky. So here is a quote from him. With so many theories and techniques available, it feels daunting for a teacher to sift through the relevant research to decide which ones show promises of efficiency. That means that it's going to be easy to use and that it's going to work and work without a lot of effort put into it. The return will be worth it and could feasibly be implemented by students. AKA, does it translate into the classroom? Okay. A good learning technique might be really efficient for recall, but it might not be useful in the classroom. Then we're not as interested in it. All right, so what are teachers doing right now in their classrooms? What are they thinking they're doing what do they know about the brain and what are they doing? This on here, if you scan through this, I'm just going to call out some of the parts. You can read it for all of them. So some teachers are using graphic organizers. They are changing the structure of their lessons to use all the senses, repetition, highlighting, close reading, paying attention to temperature, the lighting, let's see, smells. They are using, let's see, repeat to remember, again, repetition, being cognizant, there we go, or mindful that people learn differently, so you have to use all of your senses to be an effective teacher. Okay, so this came from Hook and Fire. Now, I'm going to show you that most of these things are myths. They're not actually true. And yet teachers think that this is an efficient way to be teaching. And so they're using it in their classrooms. But it's actually perhaps kind of wasting our time. Now, here's something we do know about memories and the brain. And I'm going to tell it to you now because it's going to keep coming up throughout the rest. So when we learn something, when we first learn it, we tell our brain it's important, then it gets storage strength. And this is where it gets stored in our brain. Once it's there, it's there. Okay, it doesn't actually ever get lost. However, just because it's stored does not mean we're going to be able to find it when we need it, because that is retrieval strength. And that's a whole separate thing. So sometimes we might have high storage strength because we learned something, but we don't have high retrieval strength, and so we can't find that information. And organizing your brain in a way that we can find what we're looking for is a part of building or helps build that retrieval strength. So here's a really common thing. Learning styles. I remember when I was in college and I first learned about the learning styles, okay? They made us take a quiz. We found out whether we were an auditory or a visual or a kinesthetic learner. And then after that whole thing, they talked about how as teachers, we need to make sure that we're not just teaching to our own learning style, but that we teach to all three, and that in every lesson we have something for the visual learners that they can see, something for the auditory they can hear, and something for the kinesthetic they can do. And then I remember only a few years ago going to a professional development where they said, oh, no. Actually, visual learners need to make their own visual, and an auditory learner needs to hear themselves talk about it, not you. And kinesthetic people need to make their own manipulatives, and they kind of took it and put it on the student. And yet what is so funny is now that I'm sitting here reading the research on this, none of that is necessarily actually has any research behind it. It's a myth. It's been debunked already. It is not true. The learning styles are not a real thing. So how did they come up with them? Well, They came up with them by piecing together research on different studies, and they tried to make it all fit together nicely into this. But when they did that, they changed the context of a lot of the studies that found that visual was important and it helped in certain cases, and auditory was important and would help in certain cases, and it got all mixed up. So in order to figure out whether this was working, Ann and Carr did a review, and they did a study to figure out whether the learning styles was actually helping with if people studied by their learning style. So 500 college kids, university students over 2 years in an anatomy class were told to go and take the VARC learning styles quiz, figure out what their learning style was, and then to study according to some recommendations based on their learning style. So they did that, and then at the end of the semester, they gave them a survey and found out what methods of studying they actually used, and then they looked at their grades. Okay? And from this study, they found out that it did not matter at all. If they were a visual learner and they studied by visual, it did not necessarily mean they were going to do well in the class. Okay, if they were a visual learner and they studied by auditory, it didn't matter. None of that really was helping the students. What did make a difference was specific study strategies. So that was more important, such as practicing microscope work and using lecture notes were associated with better grade performance, regardless of their learning styles. And other things were associated with bad performance, like flashcards. Wasn't really helping them. So this is so interesting because perhaps we have been wasting a lot of our time trying to cater to students and give them these quizzes when it doesn't actually help them learn more. So is all of it pointless? Do we not need visuals, auditory, and kinesthetic things in our lessons? Well, let's look at that. So research does support some things regarding learning styles. People are much better off when we combine different ways of taking in information. The richer, the better. A lot of this has to do with that retrieval strength. So when we store a memory, memories are complicated and context, and I'm getting all of this, by the way, from Benedict Carey's book called How We Learn. Okay, awesome book. You should check it out. So when a memory is stored, it's got all of the stuff that around it gets embedded into that memory. So if you're listening to music, the surroundings of your room that you're in, if you're humming, your moods sometimes even gets put into that. And so the more times that things that are embedded into that, the more chance that you're going to have a trigger to help you retrieve that fact that you're looking for, okay? It helps build that strength. So the more ways we take in the information, the richer, the better. Now let's look at specifically the visual, auditory, and kinesthetic portions, okay? So the first thing, I got the visual. So our brains work better when there's a visual to connect to words. Now, we saw this in a study that Carey talked about where they gave word pairs that they had to try to pull forward, or they connected it with a picture. And the people who saw the picture were able to recall the words and the sequences of words way longer than the people who just had the word pairs, okay? So the visuals help them. It's probably because it's a different part of their brain that are using both parts of their brain, which creates more retrieval strength. So that's one factor. The second factor, let's see, instructions mentally. This was another study, and this came from the Stenlowski article where it talked about boosted. They had science students reading a paragraph, and they told the one group that at the end of each paragraph they should come up with a mental image of what they read, and the control group just was reading for comprehension. And then at the end they compared, they took a comprehension quiz that had multiple choice that was both just recall and then also inferencing, and the group that had the mental image did a lot better. Carey also talks about studies where it shows that any type of word imagery counts as a visual, that it connects, that poetry and things like that are easier for us to recall over time than just words. Okay, we got to keep moving. So auditory. So for this, I focused on that we know that it is great to be asking our students questions like why, to get them to think about their answers. And when we do that and we cause them to talk to each other or to us to verbally process why they picked what they picked, then there's all these benefits that comes. Okay, it supports the integration of new information, what they're learning now, with what they already knew, which is creating more of those connections to be able to pull that memory forward. Okay, this also helps with organizing information, because as they're sorting it, they can organize it in a way that they can find it more easily. Okay. All right, we're going to keep going before we run out of time. So, I missed the slide for exercise. For kinesthetic, I wanted to talk about exercise because there was an article, and I have in the references sheet, you can check out where that came from. There's an article that talked about for 5th and 6th graders, they did a study to see if exercise breaks in the classroom helped with learning. And it did. It did. 10-minute breaks did the best out of 5, 10, and 20. And they found that it helped especially in math for the kids to be able to recall more. So now, best practices. Here are some things that don't necessarily have anything to do with learning styles, but we should be doing, because this is where the research actually falls. Okay, the first thing, if you are not doing this in your classroom right now, you need to start using testing not just as an assessment, but as a method of learning, because it is the most efficient way. It has the most research to back it up to help your students retain and recall what they have learned. And the reason for that is they have to think about what they've forgotten and pull it forward. Okay? All right. Here's another chart showing that not only do practice tests help with recall, but they also help with coming up with concept questions and with the organization of that. Okay, connected to practice testing is distributed practice, spacing out our lessons so that way there's time for students to forget a little bit of what they've learned, so that way it's not all working memory, but they have to dig down into the long-term memory and pull things through to build that retrieval strength. Interleaving. Interleaving is where we take old work and we mix it in with new work. And what we're doing there is we're helping them organize this information again, and we're giving them a chance where they have to think critically to figure out how these problems are different from each other and which steps to use. This was especially effective in math, and it was proven to help kids know what strategy to use. All right, so our conclusion. In conclusion, we can see that the learning styles approach is a way too simplified conception of human cognition paired with misguided recommendations. This came from the Dyslovsky article, by the way. Even though individual differences exist, they have much more to do with cultural differences and prior knowledge than a specific style that helps you learn. So it's your culture and it's your preferences. That is going to have a bigger impact than your actual learning styles. Okay? I hope that you take this, that you take the best practices and you stop using these myths in your classroom. Here are a list of the references and let me pull this up here so you can see that I got all of this stuff from. I hope you have a great day. Thanks for listening.